We're here today with Klaus Kaasgaard. Thank you very much for joining us.
Sure.
Let's jump into the first question. Why is it so hard for people to sponsor user experience research?
Wow. Well, at the chance of making myself highly unpopular, the first thing that I would point to is the research that we actually execute as research teams. So I would probably turn the question around and ask, why is it that it's so hard for us? Why is it that Tomer Sharon has to go and actually publish a book about getting stakeholder buy-in? So, I think we as a discipline have a tendency, if you think about the user experience discipline overall, but maybe especially user research, has a tendency to point fingers at others and kind of blame others for not seeing the real value of user research as we're seeing it. They're all kind of missing something. And, hypothetically speaking, maybe those people actually have a point, and I think we need to ask ourselves that question. And I think today, generally, there is buy-in to user research, and a lot has happened. A lot has happened in just the past 10 years, right? But that doesn't mean that we don't still execute user research projects that are not as impactful or as valuable as they could be. And maybe we picked the wrong things to study. Maybe we're picking the wrong methodologies. Maybe we're not really focusing on the questions that matter to businesses. I think there are many different answers to that. But I do think we have to look at ourselves rather than our stakeholders today. I think maybe 20 years ago we looked at our stakeholders and we talked a lot about education, right? And evangelizing user experience and user experience research. I think it's time for us, and has been for a couple of years, to really start looking at the field of user experience research and how we can better serve our stakeholders and answer questions that are relevant to the businesses that we serve. If you think about user experience research in the context of industry, right, where academic research is a little different. So I would take a closer look at how we're conducting user research and how we can do that better, all the way from framing the issues that we're studying to the planning and methodologies to the execution and the reporting, which hasn't really changed a whole lot, since human factors almost, right? So I still think there's some improvement that we can make on our own execution of projects.
So you mentioned business stakeholders. So when it comes to senior executives, what are their primary perceptions and concerns about user experience research?
Well, I think we've come a long way. I still think that there's some perception out there that, look, these guys need to go off and do what they do because it's part of the design process. I get that, but I don't really get the value of it myself. The customer insights that we get from most of these projects are not really at the level or strategic level or business relevance that I needed. And there's some reason for that. There's a lot of research that, user research that is specifically design research and specifically answering questions for design that executives don't necessarily want to see. They're happy knowing that we are applying a process and a methodology that one could say today is proven to be an effective process used for user-centered design, but they don't necessarily want to know all the details. When it comes to executives, obviously you need to answer questions that keep them awake at night. And they typically go beyond traditional kind of design or UI questions, right? And I don't always think we're doing a good job of pursuing the strategic questions that matter to a company. So it's sometimes a little bit a matter of balancing what's urgent versus what's important, and we tend to focus on what's urgent, the designs that need to go out next Friday versus what's really important for a company longer term.
So foundational research that involves uncovering user needs through field methods is always something that is harder to get support for. Why do you think this is the case?
I think that's the same reason. Look, again, I think you can't open a business magazine today almost without hearing about ethnographic research and the insights it uncovers with some examples. But on the other hand, I think we've all witnessed expensive and let me just call it slow, ethnographic projects that don't yield the depth of insights that we all kind of think and expect from those types of studies, including executives have those expectations. Executives today know what ethnographic research in an industry setting is, even if they don't know what ethnography means in an academic setting for an anthropologist. But I've gone to presentations of ethnographic research, where first insight is that, we visited 3 users in Colorado and 3 in Texas, and 4 out of 6 were concerned about their online privacy or their privacy, and it kind of just misses the point. So again, I would point to ourselves in how we leverage these techniques, and ethnographic research is often a very good technique to, one, get empathy with your customers, which, by the way, I would almost, or users, which I would always tout as kind of the biggest gain that you always get from these types of research methods. But they can also uncover, again, behaviors that you didn't know about from your analytics, as well as unmet needs that nobody verbalizes, but you observe from behavior. I just tend to think that you sometimes have to sit through 3 presentations of ethnographic research projects to get to that one presentation where you go, wow, yeah, this is pretty insightful, and I can really see that. I think it comes down to how user researchers pick their projects and pick the questions that they're going to try to answer. And are those questions that matter not just to your design manager, but to the business at large? And I think we need a little broader outlook from the user research community, which gets me to one of my pet peeves, which I might as well touch on here. Because for a long time I have felt that that there's a weird distinction today in 2012 between the various disciplines of research in industry. You'll have your market research team over there in that building reporting to a marketing manager, user research over in that building, and your analytics team in a shed somewhere. and they all report to different people, and although they're probably told once in a while to collaborate, they rarely do. And they have different ways of working. And to me, I think we should be beyond the days where it really matters, first of all, what you call it, is market research or user research. And secondly, which methodologies are applied, right? Apply the methodologies that are relevant to the question you're trying to answer. And very often you'll find, certainly for important questions and difficult questions, that you'll want a combination of methods that might both involve self-report feedback in a survey format, for example, coupled with behavioral observation, for example. And in my mind, that's where there's a really opportunity to develop the field, both the market research and the user research field for that matter. And I don't think we're doing a very good job of that. So I would encourage people to figure out how to. I'm not saying coupling those teams structurally. That doesn't matter. Organization is never the answer in itself, obviously. But really figure out more deeper ways to work together and to plan together. And it really isn't happening today. And I would love to see more of that.
Do you think this is a barrier, that we have these silos? This is a barrier for getting buy-in? I
think it's a barrier. Yeah. I think I have numerous examples of of executives, expressing confusion about where do I go with this question? How do we position this product? Is that a market research question or a user research question? Or how do we uncover unmet needs? Is that a market research question and the fact of the matter, it's both, right? And you shouldn't confuse people with methodologies up front, because that's almost what you're doing a little bit with that separation, right? And it's touting the methodologies in front of the questions as opposed to the other way around. And the user experience discipline as a whole, I would say, has a tendency to be very interested in our own methods and our own processes. We love our own methods and our own processes. We can talk people to death about our own processes. And I think it's something that's very unique to our discipline, and it comes from a little bit of an inferiority complex, I feel, that we have to go back and talk to how special we are all the time. I mean, when I have my monthly meeting with my finance person, and we go over my P&L or my budget or whatever, if he spent the first 30 minutes every time talking about his financial methods and processes, my eyes would glaze over in that meeting, just like they do in some meetings with user research presentations or market research presentations, for that matter, that start with talking about the methodology, right? And you can see the iPhones and Blackberries, not Blackberries so much anymore, but anyway, come out, right? And eyes start to glaze over. So, yeah.
All right. UX researchers sometimes experience a tension between conducting research they were asked to do by their stakeholders versus research they were not asked to do but think they should do. What is your approach to this tension?
If you have a problem with that, fix it. Do a lot of user researchers express that?
I hear from many people that,
okay.
They ask us to do things, that's fine. We also have things we think they should do in terms of research.
Right.
Or questions they should answer,
right.
But they don't think about them.
And in most organizations, that comes down to influencing, and that's nothing that's specific to user research, right? That in most companies, you have not so much a command style type of governance. Most companies rely on influence and collaboration, right? And that's the case here as well. You need to influence, and in order to influence, we always say, user experience people need a seat at the table. User experience research even needs a seat at the table, and that's true. But if you want a seat at the table, you also got to know when dinner is served. And so that means one of the things that I would encourage people to do is, and it's almost commonsensical. But you really need to understand what the business questions are that people are grappling with. Otherwise, there's no reason for you to be in the meeting with the general manager. So understand the context of those, or understand those business problems first and foremost. And then if you can come out and recommend an approach through which you can start to answer some of those questions and enable us to take action that we wouldn't otherwise be able to take, at least not without a lot of risk. You can minimize risk by doing this. Then you can certainly also convince executives, general managers, et cetera, to do that. And that comes back to positioning research, customer insights, whether it's user research or market research, more strategically. And we've talked about that for numerous years. And again, in order to do that, you need to know what the core business questions are, and how they relate to product, how they relate to marketing, how they relate to other aspects of the business, your channels, etc. And then starting to figure out ways how to answer those questions.
So, of all the people who contributed a case study or interview to my book, only one was brave enough to share a failure story. Can you tell me a story about a difficult stakeholder who did not understand or respect user experience research?
Oh, a stakeholder that didn't understand.
Yeah, some story without a happy ending.
Oh, I have plenty of stories with unhappy endings. I'm sure we all have our our battle scars.
Uh-huh.
Look, most of it has been around how you position the research that you've done. If you try to position it as something that's relevant to a GM, for example, and it really isn't, don't invite him and try to make it relevant. That's the only kind of, I would say those are the obvious cases where someone is in the room who probably shouldn't be in the room for that meeting. I have examples of bad research. We all do that, right? I've done bad research, right? We've all kind of, knocked out some things that we probably should have kept to ourselves, but or changed or something. But more importantly than that, I would rather than pull out a specific example. I'm actually not good at that. I would actually say try to look across 50 research presentations, the last 50 presentations you went to, and again, hopefully, we're all getting better at this, but I always tended to, if you want to think really simply about user research, it's kind of the what, the why, and then the so what, right? What does this mean for the business? And we always work in that direction. You kind of figure out what your research questions are in your methodology. Then you collect the data, that's the what. You interpret your data, that's the why. You try to interpret and explain the behaviors or the feedback that you've gotten, etc. And then you try to understand what does that mean for the business. And that latter step we haven't been very good at. And I think I see people constantly trying to improve on that, and we need to, because that's what people really care about. So I don't want to see, for the longest time I've told people who work with me that I don't really want to see presentations or reports where it's like you go through all the methodology and 6 people here and 8 people there, and then here are all the insights and 80 pages of insights, and then 4 minutes before the meeting ends there's 1 page of here are my recommendations. Right, but for the longest time, that's really what happened in user research and in market research as well. And really, what you need to do is you need to turn that on its head. That's because that's the way we work. What, why, so what, And really, what you got to start with is the so what. I remember when I was at Yahoo, we had this one exercise at some point where I said to everyone, all presentations and all reports start with 1 page that says, here are the 1 to 5 things, maximum 5, no more than 5. That you need to do as a recipient of this research with the product or with your marketing campaign or brand campaign or positioning or whatever it is in order to improve. 1 to 5 things. And for all of those who are in this room, if it's a presentation, I'll go through these 5 things. Then I'll go into the insights that led us to those 1 to 5 things. And for those of you who don't care about the insights, you can leave, right? Then I'm leaving 5 minutes at the end to kind of answer questions or go through methodology just at a very high level. And those who want more details on that, we'll set up another meeting to talk about methodology. But that's really what we should do, right? We work that direction, but we should report in that direction. I think that's what executives and other recipients of research expect of us.
All right. What are some interesting trends or approaches that you see now in user experience research?
One of the exciting trends that we see right now that's been leveraged specifically in UX as well is the whole Eric Ries's lean startup approach. And like everything else, you can get too much of a good thing. Mm-hmm. But in general, I think that's a real innovative approach to a startup philosophy or startup methodology or approach, as well as any kind of product innovation or marketing innovation that I think is really interesting. And I think user experience researchers have adopted some of those principles well, and I think that's very exciting, and I'd love to see more of that.
So the thing that attracted me to the lean startup movement or approach is the terminology that they use. Mm-hmm. They can talk, or Eric Ries can talk for hours about design and user experience research without even saying these words or mentioning our crazy jargon and methodologies.
Yeah.
What else is interesting for you in this approach?
Well, and the point that you just make it is absolutely true, and it talks a little bit. It actually emphasizes the success, I think, of user experience, if not as a discipline, then certainly as approach, or user-centered design, whatever you want to call it, as an approach to problem solving, design thinking, of course, as an approach to problem solving, that has really moved from being a little bit of an edge case approach to certainly startups and product innovation and growth, into being the center of how executives and people are thinking about that, right? Eric Ries has been here at Intuit, by the way, several times, and we're very happy with, the advice that he's giving us and helping us kind of craft our specific approach to lean and how that can be, how that can function in an Intuit context. But so I think it speaks to the I guess frame this in a kind of positive way, right? From a user experience profession perspective, really speaks to the success of the evangelization that has happened from the user experience field into other areas of business management. And I listen to Eric Ries and others talk about their approach, right? And I'm happy that they're applying some of the principles that lived earlier on in the user experience discipline, but are now being rearticulated in new and very exciting ways that are maybe a little more appropriate for startup thinking and product innovation. And we now have an important point as well is we now have let's say the tools and the technologies to support that, right? Where you can go out and you can first of all be clear about your hypotheses, but then you can go out and test them without necessarily building the whole product. Siphon off a little piece of your user base over here and don't build the whole product, but just a sliver of it, right? For a user experience professional, that's nothing new, right? That goes back to horizontal prototyping and vertical prototyping, right? And that's exactly what he's talking about, using horizontal and vertical prototyping to test very specific things in the experience. And I think that's exciting to see how that is grown and evolving, and it's a dynamic community of people, who are interested in discussing this, including user experience professionals. I'm really excited about that.
These are all the questions I had for you. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think we covered most.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.